The air in Zanzibar was thick with salt and sunlight. The year was 1946, and on a small island that seemed to float between worlds, a child took his first breath. Farrokh Bulsara. His cry was soft, like a note waiting for a song. His parents, Bomi and Jair, held him close, whispering ancient prayers over his tiny form, their voices carrying both the devotion and the faint tremor of destiny. In those early years, the ocean was his lullaby. The tides came and went like a heartbeat, steady and eternal. The markets of Stone Town sang with color, spices, fabrics, laughter, and in the middle of it all, a curious boy watched, absorbing everything. He was delicate, shy, but there was something in his eyes, a glint that spoke of hunger, not for food, but for expression, for something beyond the horizon. His family was Parsi, their faith rooted in the fire temples of old Persia, their traditions carried across generations. The sacred flame burned continuously, symbolizing purity, truth, and creation. Perhaps that flame lived inside him too, a small, steady light that would one day blaze into something the world had never seen. When Farrokh was 8, he was sent to St. Peter's School in Panchgani, India. It was there that his name began to change, slowly, almost shyly, from Farrokh to Freddie. In the echoing dormitories and sunlit courtyards, the boy began to find his voice. He joined the choir, he played the piano, and he discovered that sound could become emotion, that music could speak the things the heart could not. Even then, he was different. While others played games on the dusty fields, Freddie would sketch or hum, lost in melodies that no one else could hear. His classmates remembered his smile, radiant, mischievous, and the way he carried himself, as if he were performing for an invisible audience. He formed his first band, the Hectics, playing covers of rock and roll songs imported from faraway lands. Little did anyone know that this shy boy, far from the stages of London or the glare of stardom, was already learning how to command a crowd. In the evenings, as the sky burned orange over the hills, Freddie would sit by the piano, fingers tracing the keys softly, dreaming of something larger than life. Music became his language, his prayer, his refuge. But life, as it so often does, shifted. Political unrest swept through Zanzibar. The island that had once cradled his childhood grew tense and dangerous. In 1964, the Bulsara family fled to England, carrying with them only memories and a few suitcases. The Indian Ocean faded behind them like a song's final note. England was gray, cold, and unfamiliar. The air smelled of rain and coal instead of salt and cinnamon. In Feltham, Middlesex, Freddie began again, a boy reborn in exile. He studied art at Ealing College of Art, where colors and forms replaced words. The walls were covered in sketches and dreams, and within that creative storm, Freddie found others like him, seekers, outsiders, believers in beauty. He was fascinated by transformation, by how a blank canvas could become a world, how an ordinary life could become extraordinary. He reinvented himself not as an escape, but as an act of creation. His clothes became brighter, his manner more theatrical, his laughter louder, his presence magnetic. Farrokh Bulsara, the shy boy from Zanzibar, was slowly becoming Freddie Mercury, a name that shimmered like starlight. Music returned, calling louder now. He drifted through local bands, his voice growing stronger, richer, more untamed. And then, one night, he met Brian May and Roger Taylor, a guitarist and a drummer who were looking for something more than just a band. They were searching for alchemy, for the rare chemistry that turns noise into art. Freddie listened, smiled, and said softly, "I think I can do something with this." Together, they formed a group that would soon take on a name both regal and audacious: Queen. It was Freddie's idea, a word that carried majesty, mystery, and irony all at once. He designed the logo himself, a crest filled with astrological symbols, lions and fairies, and a phoenix rising, the visual embodiment of grandeur, and thus the curtain lifted on a new era. The early days were humble. Second-hand amplifiers, borrowed equipment, nights of rehearsing until dawn. But there was something undeniable in the air. Freddie's stage presence was already magnetic. The way he moved, the way he commanded silence, the way every glance and gesture seemed choreographed by instinct. He wasn't merely singing, he was becoming the music. As the band grew, so did the legend. The 1970s were a time of freedom, rebellion, and sound, and Queen stepped onto that stage like thunder wrapped in silk. Their first albums shimmered with experimentation: hard rock, opera, ballads, everything and nothing at once. And then came the song that would change everything: Bohemian Rhapsody. It was a gamble, 6 minutes long, impossible to categorize, and utterly defiant of every rule in the book. The record company called it madness. Freddie called it art. He had composed it piece by piece at the piano in his home. A song that was neither opera nor rock, but both, and something else entirely. A confession in disguise. When he sang, "Mama just killed a man," there was pain beneath the drama. There was something unspoken, a story too private for words, translated instead into harmony. Perhaps he was singing to his past, or to the part of himself he had buried long ago. The night they released it, the world paused. The song was unlike anything anyone had ever heard: theatrical, absurd, divine. It was a symphony in fragments, and yet whole. And when it reached #1, staying there week after week, Freddie didn't celebrate wildly. He just smiled, that quiet, knowing smile, and whispered to a friend, "I always knew it would work." The fame that followed was dazzling. Spotlights shimmered like halos above the crowd. The air trembled with electricity as he strutted across the stage, microphone in hand, voice soaring higher than the lights themselves. He wore white satin, sequins, crowns, not as vanity, but as armor. Each performance was a ritual, a battle between fire and vulnerability. And beneath the roar of the audience, beneath the stomp and the clap of "We Will Rock You," there was still that same boy from Zanzibar, the one who dreamed by the ocean, the one who loved music more than safety. Off stage, Freddie was tender, funny, and private. He filled his home with cats, laughter, and art. He spoke gently, even shyly, with the people he trusted. His closest friend and former lover, Mary Austin, remained a constant presence, his anchor. He once said she was his common-law wife, the love of his life, the person who knew the man, not the myth. And yet, there was always a loneliness, too. A quiet space between the applause and the dawn. He filled it with creation, with parties, with beauty. But even then, he sometimes looked out the window after everyone had gone and said softly, "I'm just a musical prostitute, my dear." Fame can be a mirror. It shows everything and hides even more. Freddie's reflection became larger than life, but inside he remained searching, always searching. The years spun faster. Tours around the world, endless recording sessions, the whirl of costumes and champagne and exhaustion. But through it all, his voice only grew. Deeper, bolder, transcendent. Each note he sang seemed to say, "I am here. I am alive. I am unstoppable. And perhaps he was, for a while. The stage lights dim, and in that hush before the first note, you could almost hear his heart beating. The crowd waited, breathless. Then the piano began, steady, tender, and Freddie Mercury stepped into the light. By now, Queen was no longer just a band. They were an empire of sound. Every concert was a coronation, and Freddie, with his half-microphone scepter, ruled with both command and grace. He didn't just perform, he transformed. One moment he was a warrior, the next a child. His voice could crack the air or soothe it, his hands painting invisible pictures in the smoke and light. "Darling," he'd say with a grin between songs, "you're seeing something that doesn't happen twice." And it was true. Every performance was alive, untamed, fleeting, perfect in its imperfection. He was unpredictable, radiant, and utterly free. And in the way he moved, sharp, fluid, theatrical, there was an echo of ballet, of opera, of dreams too big for one body to contain. The 1970s became their reign. Albums like A Night at the Opera and News of the World weren't just records, they were declarations. Freddie led the charge with a creative fearlessness that bordered on divine madness. He wanted everything: drama, tenderness, grandeur, all within a single song. And he achieved it. Bohemian Rhapsody had shattered expectations, but Freddie never stopped pushing. Songs like Somebody to Love, We Are the Champions, and Don't Stop Me Now followed. Anthems of joy and longing, of triumph and fragility. They weren't written just for others to sing. They were letters from his soul, delivered in melody. In quiet moments, he'd say that music was his lover, his religion, his reason. And yet, even as the lights burned brighter, a soft ache grew behind his laughter. He had Mary, yes, his dear friend, his confidant. But his heart longed for something less understood, more forbidden in that time. Freddie moved through a world that didn't yet know how to accept him fully. Behind the glitter and the roar, there were nights of doubt, moments when the silence after the show felt heavier than the music that came before. He once told a friend, "The loneliness of fame is the most bitter kind. Everyone knows your name, but no one really knows you." And in that quiet truth, he carried a secret kind of sorrow, the kind that only artists and dreamers know too well. Still, he refused to let sadness define him. Instead, he turned it into fire. Every wound became a note, every heartbreak a lyric, every fear a crescendo. He built beauty from the broken pieces, always with that half smile, as if to say, "I'll show you what pain can do." As the 1980s dawned, the world began to change, and so did Freddie. Gone were the flowing kimonos and feather boas of the 70s. In their place came leather, denim, and sharp lines. The mustache became a symbol, bold, unapologetic, masculine, defiant. He was no longer hiding, he was becoming. And with his transformation came a deeper creative power. Queen evolved, blending rock with pop, funk, and electronic sounds. Critics were divided, but Freddie didn't care. He wasn't chasing approval, he was chasing truth. The music pulsed with rhythm and rebellion. Another one bites the dust. Radio Gaga, I Want to Break Free. Each song carried its own heartbeat, and each performance was a world unto itself. When asked once what Queen's secret was, Freddie replied softly, "We just want to be remembered for the music. That's all. The rest is decoration." And yet, his decorations, his style, his costumes, his theatrics, were essential to his storytelling. They weren't masks. They were extensions of his soul, painted in light and sound. Still, behind the spectacle, the man remained tender. At home in Garden Lodge, his London sanctuary, he found peace. The house was filled with flowers, antiques, and soft music. Cats roamed freely, each one adored and named: Delilah, Goliath, Oscar, Tiffany. Freddie would talk to them as if they were his children, calling their names in that lilting voice that could melt both stone and stage. He surrounded himself with beauty. Not luxury for luxury's sake, but beauty that soothed his spirit. He loved Japanese art, the quiet precision of it, the way it captured emotion in stillness. Perhaps it reminded him that not all power is loud. At parties, he was dazzling, the perfect host, the life of the room. But when the guests were gone, he often sat by the piano in the dark, playing softly, eyes half closed. Sometimes Mary would visit, and they'd talk long into the night, about love, about time, about what it meant to be seen. He told her once, "You're the only friend I've got, and I mean that." And she, with quiet devotion, remained by his side through it all, through the chaos, the fame, the silence. The world saw the performer. She saw the man. As the decade unfolded, Freddie's power only grew. Then came 1985, Wembley Stadium, Live Aid. It was more than a concert. It was a resurrection. In front of 72,000 people, and nearly 2 billion watching from their homes, Freddie Mercury stood before the world with the kind of command that defies language. He wore a white tank top, jeans, and that studded armband. No frills, no costumes, just pure presence. When he sang Radio Gaga, and the entire crowd clapped in unison, it was as if the heartbeat of the planet itself echoed back at him. For 20 minutes, he ruled not as a rock star, but as something beyond that. A vessel of collective emotion, joy, memory, unity. Every hand in the air, every voice raised, all orbiting him like planets around a sun. And in that moment, he seemed infinite. Later, his bandmates would say it was the greatest performance in the history of rock. Freddie, ever humble, just smiled and said, "We were good, weren't we?" But inside, perhaps he knew. Something in him had reached its peak, a summit few would ever know again. After Wembley, the years shimmered like heat on a distant horizon. The tours continued, the albums multiplied, the magic endured. But behind the brilliance, a shadow began to form, one that no amount of light could completely dispel. It began quietly, a fatigue here, a cough there. Nothing alarming at first, just the wear and tear of a life lived at full volume. But Freddie knew his body intimately, the way a singer must. He could feel when something was wrong. By the late 1980s, whispers began to circle. The world was changing, and with it came fear, the shadow of a new and deadly illness that seemed to strike silently without mercy. Freddie, always private, said a little. He faced it as he faced everything, with grace and in his own time. He continued to record, to perform, to live. But there was a new stillness in him, a quiet defiance, like a candle refusing to go out in the wind. He surrounded himself with those he trusted most: Mary, his partner Jim Hutton, his bandmates, and his beloved cats. Within the sanctuary of Garden Lodge, he created a world apart from the noise, a place where love and music could still breathe. Freddie was not one to dwell in despair. Instead, he turned pain into creation. The band gathered in the studio, and even when his body began to weaken, his spirit did not. They recorded The Miracle, Innuendo, and songs that shimmered with both brilliance and fragility. Every lyric, every harmony carried the weight of unspoken truth. He sang with new intensity, as though aware that time was slipping quietly through his fingers. His voice, still majestic, still capable of breaking hearts and lifting souls, seemed to reach deeper into something eternal. In The Show Must Go On, Brian May wrote words that felt like prophecy, and Freddie sang them with the courage of a man who refused to surrender. Inside my heart is breaking. My makeup may be flaking, but my smile still stays on. When he sang those lines, it wasn't just performance. It was revelation. It was goodbye, whispered through melody. And yet, even then, he never spoke publicly of his illness. Not out of shame, but out of dignity. He wanted the world to see him not as a victim, but as an artist, alive, creating, burning bright until the very end. At home, he found quiet joy in the simplest things. He would feed his cats, talk to them softly, laugh with friends, sip tea in the garden. He decorated his home with flowers and candles, the scent of lilies filling every room. Mary and Jim were constants, gentle presences who understood the rhythm of his silence. Sometimes he would sit at the piano, fingers tracing the keys without sound, as if feeling the echoes of songs yet unwritten. He told Mary once, "You can't give in to sadness. You have to make the sadness sing." And that is what he did, until the very end. In his final months, the studio became his temple. The band recorded as they always had. Laughter between takes, teasing, perfectionism. But behind every note was a shared understanding that time was precious. Freddie's body was frail, yet when he stood before the microphone, something miraculous happened. The weakness disappeared. The fire returned. He would say, "Roll the tape, dear," with that half grin, and then music. Pure, defiant, immortal music. His final recording sessions were acts of quiet heroism. He sang until his voice ached, until he could give no more. When asked how he managed, he replied simply, "I'll keep singing until I'm bloody well dead." There was no self-pity, only devotion, only art. And then came These Are the Days of Our Lives, a song so tender, so wistful, that it feels like a lullaby for the soul. The video was filmed in May of 1991. Freddie appeared fragile, his frame thinner, his movements slower. But his eyes, those eyes, still shone with infinite light. At the end of the song, he looked into the camera, smiled faintly, and whispered, "I still love you." A message not just to his fans, but to life itself, to every moment, every note, every breath that had brought him here. In November of that year, he released a statement to the world, brief, honest, and final. He confirmed that he had AIDS, and that he had chosen privacy to protect those around him. "My friends," he wrote, "please join with me and my doctors in fighting this terrible disease." It was the last time he would speak publicly. The next day, November 24th, 1991, Freddie Mercury passed away peacefully at home, surrounded by those he loved. He was 45. Outside Garden Lodge, fans gathered in silence. Candles flickered along the pavement. Flowers carpeted the walls. Someone began to sing Bohemian Rhapsody, softly at first, then louder as more joined in. It was not mourning, it was communion. The kind of moment Freddie himself would have understood, where grief and beauty became one. In the days that followed, tributes poured in from around the world. Elton John, David Bowie, and countless others spoke of his genius, his generosity, his courage. Brian, Roger, and John were devastated, but they carried his music forward, the echo that would never fade. And then, months later, came the tribute concert at Wembley Stadium. 70,000 people and millions watching from their homes gathered to celebrate not just the performer, but the man, the artist who had given everything. When Elton John and Axl Rose sang Bohemian Rhapsody together, and the final notes rose into the sky, it was as if Freddie was there, smiling, basking in the love he had always deserved. But perhaps the truest tribute is the one that never ends, the quiet persistence of his voice, still alive in the songs that continue to play decades later. In every car radio humming "Don't Stop Me Now," in every child discovering we are the champions for the first time, in every heart that still trembles at "Love of My Life." Freddie Mercury, Farrokh Bulsara, remains more than a legend. He is a reminder that beauty can be born from struggle, that joy can coexist with sorrow, that pain can become power. Somewhere, perhaps, he's still singing. Not on a stage, not in the glare of spotlights, but beyond them, where the music never ends. A place where he can finally rest and rise again in every echo of his own creation. And perhaps, somewhere beyond the stars, he still takes the stage, bathed in light, free at last, reminding us that real love never ends, it just changes key. The years that followed his passing were softer, quieter, yet his presence never left. For those who had known him, every sunrise seemed to carry a fragment of his laughter, every fading sunset, the last echo of his voice. The world had lost its brightest star, but his light had already scattered into millions of hearts. In the studio archives, unfinished takes and fragments of melodies remained, small miracles suspended in time. The surviving members of Queen returned, hearts heavy to complete what Freddie had begun. The result was Made in Heaven, a final love letter between the man and the music, between the voice and the silence that followed. When the album was released in 1995, it was as if Freddie had risen once more. His voice glided through every track, ethereal yet strong, and in songs like A Winter's Tale and Mother Love, there was peace, an acceptance that transcended sorrow. Brian May once said that when they were mixing the final songs, they could almost feel Freddie in the room, smiling, urging them on. "Go on, darlings," he would have said. "Make it perfect." And they did. Because that was Freddie. He always believed perfection was not an act of ego, but of love. Love for the art. Love for the audience. Love for the fleeting beauty of life itself. Over the years, his legend only deepened. You can still see him, frozen in time. The fist raised high at Wembley, the eyes closed in joy, the mouth open in that impossible note that seemed to bridge heaven and earth. Yet behind every image there is a man who loved deeply, who feared quietly, who gave more than he ever took. The world has changed, but his story still whispers to us of courage, of reinvention, of how pain can be the raw material for something divine. Children born long after his time sing his songs as if they were ancient hymns. Concerts end with his voice projected on screens, and entire crowds lift their arms to the sky, as if reaching for him, as if he might reach back. In the quiet of night, his melodies still find their way into the air. Love of my life. These are the days of our lives. Who wants to live forever? They carry with them all that he was: tenderness, fire, mischief, longing. And perhaps that is the truest form of immortality. Not statues or headlines, but the unseen threads that tie one soul to another through art. Freddie Mercury turned his own struggles into those threads, weaving a tapestry that continues to shimmer long after the spotlight has faded. In a world that often feared difference, he was defiant in his truth. He showed that beauty thrives in contradiction, that power can exist in fragility, that love, real love, is never something to be hidden. He did not live to be ordinary. He lived to be himself. And that, in the end, is what made him eternal. Imagine him now, somewhere beyond all the noise. A vast stage, infinite stars for an audience. A piano waiting patiently in the glow. He walks across that stage, not hurriedly, but with the grace of someone who has nothing left to prove. He sits, adjusts the microphone, and plays the first chord. The sound drifts through the cosmos, soft and bright, and every planet turns a little slower to listen. It is the same sound that once filled the arenas of London, the same light that once illuminated millions of faces, but now it belongs to eternity. And perhaps, just perhaps, when we close our eyes at night, when the world quiets and our hearts soften, we can hear him still, singing not to a crowd, but to us, to you, to the dreamer within every listener, a voice gentle as starlight. Don't stop me now. I'm having such a good time. And the music fades, slowly, tenderly, until only silence remains. A silence filled with everything he ever was. Freddie Mercury, the boy from Zanzibar, the man who became a legend, the soul who turned pain into power and left the world forever changed. And perhaps, somewhere beyond the stars, he still takes the stage, bathed in light, free at last, reminding us that real love never ends. It just changes key. There is a kind of hush that falls before creation, that suspended breath before the first note. For Freddie Mercury, that silence was sacred. He would linger in it, as if listening for something only he could hear, a rhythm just beyond the edge of sound. And then, as though the universe itself had whispered permission, he would begin. The 1980s brought both triumph and transformation. After the game and hot space, Queen had evolved again, unafraid to explore new territory. Disco beats, pop hooks, electronic textures. Nothing was off limits. The critics, of course, were uncertain. But Freddie, he was never one to bow to expectation. "Darling," he'd say, with that half-smile, "we're not here to fit in. We're here to make people feel." And they did. The stadiums filled. The anthems grew louder. Songs like Under Pressure, born from an impromptu session with David Bowie, carried the pulse of human anxiety and hope alike. Two voices, both haunted and divine, weaving together, pushing against the weight of the world. It wasn't just a collaboration. It was a moment when genius recognized itself in another. Freddie lived large, but never thought of it as excess. To him, it was theater, a celebration of life's briefness. He loved grand gestures, laughter that spilled over, nights that glowed until dawn. At parties, he was electric, the center of gravity in every room. Yet those who knew him well noticed that sometimes, even in laughter, his eyes looked far away, as if part of him was elsewhere. At a piano in some quiet room, shaping melody out of longing. He was both showman and seeker, one half draped in sequins and light, the other a solitary soul searching for stillness. He once said, "I'm just a person who loves too much, and perhaps too many things." That love, untamed, imperfect, flowed through everything he touched. He found in Mary Austin a mirror of deep affection, one that endured even as their romance shifted into friendship. Later, in Jim Hutton, he found a tenderness, a quiet, grounding presence amid the whirlwind. And, through it all, he remained fiercely loyal to those few who understood him not as Freddie the icon, but Freddie the man. The one who liked to feed his cats at midnight, who collected art books and Japanese prints, who played Chopin when the house was empty. There were moments, rare but real, when he would confide his fears. The fear of being forgotten, the fear of love fading. But he never stayed there long. He would laugh, shake it off, and pour everything back into the music. Because creation, for him, was healing. Every chord, every lyric, a way of saying, I'm still here, I'm still alive. The studio became both confessional and cathedral. He could be demanding, playful, unstoppable, pushing his bandmates to the edge of perfection. Come on, darlings, he'd call out. We can do better than that. And somehow, they always did. Brian May once said that Freddie had the rare gift of making everyone around him play beyond themselves. It wasn't fear that drove them, but the sheer force of his belief, that conviction that music was a kind of magic, and they were its chosen messengers. And perhaps that's what Queen really was. 4 men bound by art, not similarity. Different souls united by sound. And Freddie, radiant, mercurial, unstoppable, was the alchemist. Even as success multiplied, so did the weight of expectation. The tours grew longer, the noise louder. The world adored Freddie Mercury, but few truly saw Farrokh Bulsara anymore. He began to sense it, that subtle fracture between the person and the persona, between the man who laughed over tea and the legend who could electrify 100,000 hearts in a single breath. There's a kind of loneliness that fame cannot cure, a silence that deepens after the applause fades. Sometimes, after a show, he would linger backstage long after the others had gone, still in costume, staring into the mirror. Not with vanity, but wonder. Who was he now, the reflection or the shadow? And yet, he would always return to what saved him. The music. He would step to the piano, even at 3 a.m, and begin again. His fingers barely touching the keys, coaxing beauty from exhaustion. Sometimes it was joy, sometimes pain, but always truth. Music, he once said softly, is the only friend that never leaves. And for him, it never did. As the decade deepened, Freddie's world grew louder on the outside and quieter within. The stadiums swelled to oceans of faces. The lights blazed hotter. The roar of love and adoration thundered around him. But in that chaos, he began to crave stillness. A different kind of music, one made of silence, of breath, of the unspoken. He found it sometimes in small things. In the early morning stillness before the city awoke, when the only sound was the faint hum of London beyond his window. In the soft fur of his cat, Delilah, curling in his lap as he read letters from fans. In the way sunlight fell through stained glass, painting his piano in gold. Those were the moments that reminded him that all glory, all fire, begins from something small and tender. Yet, he could not escape the fire. It was his gift, his burden, his heartbeat. When he stood on stage, it was as if something larger than life took hold of him. Not an act, but an invocation. Every motion, every glance, every raised hand was a communion with the divine. He once joked, "I'm not going to be a rock star, I'm going to be a legend." And somehow, even in jest, he spoke the truth. Because Freddie Mercury did not perform songs, he became them. He was the heartbreak in Somebody to Love, the ecstasy in Don't Stop Me Now, the unyielding triumph in We Are the Champions. He was every note, every emotion, every contradiction of being alive. The band, by now, was like a family, tempestuous, loving, bound by music stronger than blood. There were fights, of course, laughter too. They disagreed about songs, about direction, about who they were becoming. But through every storm, one thing remained untouched: their devotion to the craft. When they played together, something mystical happened. 4 currents of energy converging into one river of sound. During recording sessions, Freddie would pace the studio like a restless spirit. He'd hum melodies under his breath, rewriting, reshaping, searching for that one perfect phrase that captured what he felt. Brian May would watch him sometimes and think, he's chasing something beyond music, something eternal. And maybe he was. His life was filled with movement, constant, dazzling. But beneath the motion, he longed for stillness, for connection, for a kind of home that applause could never give. He once confided to a close friend, "I have everything, but sometimes I still feel like the boy who left Zanzibar, just trying to find a place to belong." That search, invisible yet relentless, colored his music with a rare honesty. Behind every glittering performance was a note of yearning, a quiet plea to be understood, even if only for a moment. And then came The Works, an album that felt like reflection and rebellion intertwined. Songs like It's a Hard Life revealed something raw, the man behind the mask. In that song, his voice carried a softness almost never heard before. It was as if he'd peeled away the armor and let the heart sing alone. The lyrics told of love's cruelty, of its beauty and its cost. It's a hard life to be true lovers together. It was Freddie, stripped bare, a soul admitting that even at the summit of fame, love remained both his salvation and his ache. But for every ache, there was still wonder. Every show was a renewal, every song a resurrection. At Live Aid, he became the heartbeat of the world, the embodiment of unity in sound. That performance, just 20 minutes long, captured everything he was: power, grace, humor, and pure, unguarded humanity. When the crowd clapped in unison, when he led them in the ayo, call and response, it wasn't just performance. It was communion. A moment where millions breathed together. He lifted them. He lifted all of us. Afterward, when asked how it felt, he only smiled and said, "It felt like home." But home, for Freddie, was never a place. It was music, that endless horizon he could never stop chasing. And as the years turned, he began to realize something profound, that maybe the greatest act of creation is not to escape pain, but to transform it, to turn it into something beautiful. That's what he did, over and over again. He turned loneliness into melody, longing into rhythm, fear into art. And each time he did, he reached a little closer to peace. The nights grew longer and the crowds even larger. By the mid-1980s, Queen had become a force of nature, unstoppable, unrepeatable. And Freddie, at the center of it all, gleamed like a comet on fire. Yet even as he soared higher than anyone else, a quiet voice inside him began to whisper. It spoke of rest, of reflection, of all the things that fame could not fill. He began to withdraw, just a little. The extravagant parties became rarer, replaced by candlelit dinners, soft jazz, and laughter shared among trusted friends. He still loved to entertain, but now the audience was smaller and the joy more sincere. Those who knew him well saw it clearly, the transformation of a man who had spent a lifetime running from silence, now learning to make peace with it. Sometimes, after guests had gone home, Freddie would wander his garden under the moonlight. He'd stop by the pond, light a cigarette, and stare into the reflection of the stars. "I'm lucky, you know," he'd murmur to Jim. "Most people only dream of flying. I got to do it for real." And then he'd smile, faintly, wistfully, and whisper, But every flight must land, darling. Every song must end. Still, he never truly stopped creating. His voice, his imagination, his hunger, they burned too brightly to fade. Even as he felt the weight of illness begin to press upon him, he refused to let it take his art. There's something sacred about those final years. They shimmer with courage. He recorded Innuendo and The Miracle as if nothing had changed, laughing, teasing, pouring his whole being into every note. His bandmates knew the truth, of course. They could see the pain behind his eyes. But in the studio, Freddie demanded only music. No sympathy, no sorrow. "Don't pity me, darlings," he'd say. "Just give me the best bloody performance you can." And he did the same. Every time. When they recorded The Show Must Go On, he was so weak that Brian May feared he wouldn't manage to sing it. But Freddie, smiling through exhaustion, simply said, "I'll bloody well do it, dear." He took a deep breath, lifted his chin, and sang as if the universe itself depended on it. The words became prophecy. "My soul is painted like the wings of butterflies. Fairy tales of yesterday will grow but never die." It wasn't just a song. It was a declaration, a promise that art outlives the flesh, that love outlasts even time. Outside the studio, his world had grown smaller, more precious. Days filled with soft light, music drifting through rooms heavy with flowers. He painted, he read, he watched the seasons change from the safety of his home. He would rest in the garden, cats dozing beside him, and say to Mary, "When I'm gone, make sure they don't forget me." She smiled, eyes glistening. "They could never forget you, Freddie." And she was right. He faced his illness with dignity, humor, and unbreakable will. He told almost no one. He wanted privacy, not pity. In the evenings, he'd sit at the piano, playing fragments of unfinished songs. Some he'd hum softly, some he'd leave wordless. Tiny prayers made of melody. Jim Hutton would bring him tea, and they'd talk quietly about love, about what matters when everything else falls away. Freddie would laugh, still mischievous even in frailty, and say, "Darling, if I die tomorrow, I've had it all. I've lived exactly how I wanted to." And that's rare. He knew the end was near, but he met it the way he met everything, on his own terms, with style, humor, and music. His last days were filled with light. Candles glowing, flowers blooming, gentle laughter in the rooms of the garden lodge. And though his body weakened, his spirit only grew stronger. He left behind not just songs, but something rarer, a kind of peace that lingers in the air whenever his music plays. Because Freddie Mercury didn't just sing. He taught us how to live, how to love without apology, how to face the dark and make it shine. He was fire and grace. He was chaos and kindness. He was every contradiction that makes humanity beautiful. And when he finally let go, the world didn't fall silent. It began to hum, softly, reverently, with the sound of everything he'd ever given. Even now, when the first notes of Bohemian Rhapsody drift through the night, something stirs in the soul. A reminder that brilliance may fade, but it never truly dies. Freddie Mercury, the boy from Zanzibar who became the light of a generation, the man who took his pain and turned it into power. In the hush that followed his passing, the world seemed to exhale all at once. Radio stations played his songs without interruption. Flowers covered the gates of Garden Lodge in impossible color. Everywhere there was music, his music, rising from windows, drifting down streets, echoing through the homes of those who had grown up with his voice. For a while, London felt like a requiem, But it was also something else, a celebration. Because even in death, Freddie refused to be tragic. He left behind laughter, beauty, and the shimmering truth that joy is a form of defiance. Brian May said that after his death, the hardest part was the silence in the studio. They had spent 20 years together, 4 men orbiting the same dream. Now, when he entered the room, there was no voice teasing him, no laughter ringing through the control booth, only memory. But when they began to play the tapes, Freddie returned, that unmistakable voice, that warmth, that spark. It was as though he had only stepped outside for a moment and would soon come back through the door with his usual flair. "Right, darlings, shall we make some noise?" They did. The album, Made in Heaven, became both farewell and resurrection. Each track glowed with a strange, holy tenderness. Too Much Love Will Kill You, A Winter's Tale, Heaven for Everyone. Listening to it felt like standing in the soft light before dawn, the moment when night begins to forgive the world. For fans, it was a final gift. For his friends, it was closure, and yet not really. Because how do you say goodbye to a voice that still fills the air? Years passed, and still he did not fade. In 1992, the tribute concert at Wembley became a cathedral of sound. 70,000 voices sang his songs, not in mourning, but in gratitude. When the first notes of Bohemian Rhapsody began, and the crowd sang without him, there was a feeling that he was still there, not on stage, but everywhere. David Bowie read the Lord's Prayer. Elton John sang with trembling grace, and Brian May, Roger Taylor, and John Deacon played through tears. It wasn't just a concert, it was communion. It was proof that what Freddie gave to the world was larger than fame. It was connection. The years rolled onward, and Queen's music endured. New generations discovered him not through memory, but through rediscovery. Each decade seemed to bring him back. A new film, a new tribute, a new understanding of what he had meant. And in every version, the truth remained. He had loved life too much to ever truly leave it. In time, the myth of Freddie Mercury grew, but so did the tenderness. People began to see beyond the glamour, beyond the theatrics, into the quiet, fragile, beautiful humanity that had always been there. The boy from Zanzibar, the man from Feltham, the dreamer who built a kingdom of song. His legacy is not carved in marble, but in melody. It lives in the chords of "Don't Stop Me Now" that make strangers smile. It lingers in the echo of "Love of My Life." Still sung by audiences decades later, thousands of voices joined as one. It is there in the pause between verses, in the breath before the final note, in the hush that follows, the place where Freddie's spirit still lives. And if you listen closely, in that silence, you can almost hear him laugh. That bright, irreverent, joyful laugh, as if to say, "You see, darling, I told you I'd never really go away," because he hasn't. He exists in the way his music makes people stand taller, sing louder, feel braver. He exists in every heart that's ever found courage in his voice. He exists in that delicate balance between sorrow and joy, the one he mastered so completely. Freddie Mercury remains the man who turned pain into power, who turned life into art, who turned fleeting human moments into something eternal. And maybe that's all any of us can hope for. To take what hurts, what burns, what breaks us, and make it sing. So tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine him once more. A figure on a vast celestial stage, bathed in gentle light. He smiles, raises the microphone, and begins to play. The first note is soft as breath. The second, strong as love. And the third goes on forever. The stage is quiet now, but the air still holds his echo. You can almost feel it, that lingering hum of energy, like starlight that never quite fades. It drifts across decades, across oceans, across the thin veil between what was and what remains. Somewhere, a record spins. A piano waits in the dark. A voice, his voice, rises again, warm and fearless, like a heartbeat that refuses to stop. Freddie Mercury. He lived as though every moment were a performance, but not in the way people think. Performance, to him, wasn't artifice. It was honesty. The kind of honesty that can only exist when you strip away the world's expectations and reveal the wild, glowing truth beneath. When he sang, he wasn't pretending to be larger than life. He was showing that life itself was larger than we dared to believe. And so his music endures because it reminds us of what it means to be human. Flawed, brilliant, fleeting, infinite. There is a story his friends tell that near the end he would sit quietly and listen to Barcelona, his collaboration with Montserrat Caballé. It was one of his proudest creations, a union of rock and opera, two worlds colliding to form something new. He adored her voice, its strength, its clarity, and she adored his. When they recorded together, they laughed like children, trading phrases, daring each other to climb higher, to sing with more heart. In that project, you can feel everything he loved about music, its drama, its risk, its boundless possibility. Barcelona was not just a song. It was a celebration of life itself, grand, unpredictable, beautiful. He would close his eyes as it played, smile faintly, and say, "That's how I want to be remembered. Bold, different, free." And that's exactly how he is remembered. Because Freddie Mercury was never one thing. He was not simply a singer, or a star, or an icon. He was 1,000 things at once. Contradictions wrapped in grace. The extrovert who craved solitude. The romantic who feared being truly seen. The artist who turned fear into fire. The man who gave everything and asked only to be loved, not worshipped. It's easy to mythologize him now, to paint him as immortal. But perhaps the real miracle lies in how human he was. He laughed too loudly, loved too fiercely, hurt too deeply. He stumbled, he doubted, he ached, and still he created light. That's why, when people hear his music, they don't just listen. They feel. They feel braver, kinder, more alive. Because somewhere within every note, he whispers, "It's okay to be strange. It's okay to shine. It's okay to love the world, even when it breaks your heart." In the years since he left, his legacy has only grown more intimate. New generations discover him not as a relic, but as a friend. Someone who gives them permission to exist exactly as they are. Flawed, flamboyant, fearless. Watch any concert footage now and you'll see it. Freddie on stage, arms outstretched, eyes closed, the crowd rising to meet him. It isn't spectacle. It's surrender. The audience offers him their energy, and he gives it back 1,000-fold until there is no line between artist and admirer. Only one shared, blazing heartbeat. That's what love looks like. That's what immortality sounds like. When the lights dim and the final note fades, we are left with silence. But it's not empty. It's full of memory, full of him. Every time you hear his voice, you are hearing courage made audible. The boy from Zanzibar became the man who showed the world how to be extraordinary. He took the pain of exile, the ache of loneliness, the burden of difference, and turned them into an anthem for freedom. And though he is gone, the music still rises, softly, boldly, forever. He once said, "You can do anything with your life, darling. You just need the courage to live it." Perhaps that's the secret he left us, the quiet message beneath the thunder of his songs. That life, no matter how brief or bruised, can be magnificent if you dare to make it your own. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine that somewhere the concert continues. The lights glow gold. The crowd holds its breath. And there, at the center of it all, stands Freddie Mercury, smiling, radiant, untouchable. He lifts his microphone. He looks to the stars, and with that familiar twinkle in his eye, he whispers to the heavens, "Let's do it again, darlings." And the universe, unable to resist, plays along. There are nights when the world feels smaller, quieter, softer, like the air itself has chosen to listen. Those are the nights when his music still feels closest. When Somebody to Love spills from an old radio, and suddenly it's not just a song anymore, it's a presence. Freddie Mercury never truly left, because his music was never meant to belong to time. It was meant to belong to feeling, to the ache, the joy, the yearning that make us human. He once said, "I'm not going to be one of those rock stars who just fades away. I'll be a legend." He smiled when he said it, half teasing, half prophecy. But legends, if you look closely, are not made of gold and thunder. They are made of small human moments that shimmer long after they pass. Think of the boy in Zanzibar, sketching in the dust, humming to the sea. Think of the young man in England, hunched over a piano, believing in a sound that didn't yet exist. Think of the performer in Wembley, raising his arm to the sky, 70,000 souls singing in one breath. And then, think of the quiet man at home, tea steaming, cat purring, the city outside fading into twilight. All of them were Freddie. All of them still are. That's the paradox of his life. He was larger than existence, and yet so heartbreakingly ordinary. He could wear a crown and rule the stage, then come home and fret over a chipped teacup. He could make millions roar, then whisper apologies to a stray cat he accidentally stepped on. He was a contradiction wrapped in grace. Tenderness inside thunder. His story is more than the rise and fall of a rock star. It's the story of a man who dared to live fully, fiercely, unapologetically, who made art not from perfection, but from pain, who turned loneliness into lyric, sorrow into spectacle, and fear into freedom. And maybe that's why he still touches us. Because deep down, we all long to be what he was, unashamed of our strangeness, unafraid of our fire. He showed us that vulnerability is not weakness, and that beauty is not always gentle. It can roar. Every artist leaves a kind of echo, but Freddie left a constellation. Each song a star, each performance a pulse of light. They hang above us still, reminding us that brilliance doesn't die. It disperses, it multiplies, it becomes part of everything. When you listen to him now, when the piano of Bohemian Rhapsody begins, or when the chorus of We Are the Champions swells, you're not just hearing a voice. You're hearing defiance. You're hearing survival. You're hearing a man telling the universe, "I was here." And he was. So vividly, so completely, that he changed what it means to live out loud. Freddie Mercury was not a saint, nor did he try to be. He was flawed, fragile, and fiercely alive. He made mistakes, he broke hearts, he broke himself, and still he sang. That's the miracle of it, that, in the face of it all, he chose joy. Even now, long after the curtain has fallen, you can close your eyes and picture him. The spotlight dimming, the crowd fading into silence. He stands at the microphone one last time, the ghost of a smile playing across his lips. He leans in, whispers, "Thank you, darlings," and disappears into light. But the light never leaves. It lingers, in the breath between heartbeats, in the hum of a distant melody, in the quiet knowing that somewhere, somehow, he's still singing. Because Freddie Mercury was never just a man. He was a moment, a flash of brilliance that refused to be contained. And like all true stars, he burned not to last, but to illuminate. And he did. So the years continue their slow turning, and still the music breathes. Somewhere, a jukebox clicks, a dusty record spins, the needle drops, and the opening piano of Bohemian Rhapsody unfurls like dawn. Even after all this time, it still feels like discovery, like a secret being told for the first time, softly into the dark. That's what his art does. It renews itself. Each generation finds him anew, each listener hearing something different, a melody for the lost, a rhythm for the brave, a voice for the silenced. It is a strange and beautiful kind of resurrection. There is a tenderness that lingers in the way people speak of him. Not just admiration, but affection. Because beyond the flamboyance, beyond the spectacle, Freddie was human in a way that made everyone else feel a little more human too. He lived through times that tried to make difference a secret. And yet he refused to be hidden. He turned queerness into color, into theater, into music that filled the air with pride before pride had a name. He never preached it, never explained it. He simply was. And that, in its quietest form, was rebellion. He wore his truth like silk and smoke, soft yet undeniable. He made joy political, laughter subversive, love eternal. And though the world has changed, his courage still ripples outward, touching those who need it most. Sometimes in interviews he would joke, brushing away serious questions with a flick of his wrist and a mischievous grin. But behind the wit, there was wisdom. He knew that art and identity were not separate things, that every song was a confession in disguise, every stage an altar of self-acceptance. "Darling," he once said, "I'm not interested in being normal. Normal is boring." And with that, he gave countless others permission to live boldly too. Even now, his image endures, not frozen in nostalgia, but alive, projected across screens, painted on walls, tattooed on hearts. He exists not as a memory, but as a reminder that beauty is born from courage, and freedom is found in self-expression. There's a story, half true, half legend, of a fan who wrote to him once, saying that his music had saved her life. Freddie, moved, wrote back a short note. "My dear, music saved mine too." That was the secret he never really hid. That, behind the grandeur, behind the crown and the spotlight, was a soul that needed saving as much as it sought to save. When he sang, he healed himself, and in doing so, he healed others. In the quiet of night, when his songs drift through open windows, you can still feel that healing. It moves through the air like perfume, like memory, like mercy. Imagine him there, backstage somewhere beyond time. The crowd waiting, the lights dimmed, his band tuning in the distance. He takes a breath, adjusts his microphone, looks to the side with that familiar glint in his eyes. He knows what's coming. He knows the power of the first note. He closes his eyes, and for a heartbeat, everything is still. Then the piano begins. A single chord, soft, eternal. The story continues, because his story never ended. There are places where the world feels like it's holding its breath. An empty theater after the last encore, a piano left open in the dark, the soft hum of sound systems cooling down. In those places he still lingers, a vibration in the air, a memory dressed in melody. Because Freddie Mercury was never a man who simply ended. He was a continuation of art, of courage, of sound. His voice didn't stop when he did. It folded itself into time, looping endlessly through the speakers of the world. For many, hearing him now feels like meeting an old friend. There's comfort in the way his voice rises and falls, in the effortless drama of it, in the laughter between lines. He reminds us that life, even in its pain, is worth singing about. And perhaps that was his greatest magic. He could take a feeling that was unbearable and make it beautiful. He could turn heartbreak into harmony, and fear into fire. Each song was an act of transformation, proof that pain could become power if only you dared to voice it. He once said, "I won't be a rock star, I'll be a legend." But even that feels too small now. He didn't just redefine rock, he redefined what it meant to be alive, to exist out loud, to glow unapologetically even in the dark. Every artist since carries a trace of him. The courage to be strange, the hunger to be true, the joy of creating something that might outlast the flesh. When you listen to The Show Must Go On, it's impossible not to feel his heartbeat within it. Even as he was dying, he poured his entire being into that song, one last roar into the universe. And somehow, that roar turned into light. It became a reminder that the show, the human story, never really stops. It shifts, it evolves, it echoes. Somewhere right now, a young musician is standing at a microphone, trembling, afraid to sing too loudly. And maybe, somewhere deep inside, they hear his voice. "Go on, darling. Don't hold back. Let them feel you." And they do. And the world becomes a little more alive again. That is his immortality. Not the statues, not the awards, not even the fame. It's the permission he gave others to live fully, fiercely, freely, to love who they love, to dress as they please, to make art from the chaos. He made the stage a sanctuary and showed us that we all belong there, not as performers, but as souls brave enough to be seen. In every lifetime, there are a few voices that remind us what it means to be human. His was one of them. Golden, untamed, infinite. And now, when night falls and you drift toward sleep, you might hear it still. A whisper between dreams, a melody just beyond hearing. Sing your song, darling. The world is waiting. And somewhere, beyond the veil of sound, Freddie Mercury smiles. A new star burns a little brighter, and the music plays on. The night deepens, the world slows, and in the stillness, memory becomes melody. It's easy to imagine him now, not as the untouchable icon, but as the quiet dreamer he always was beneath the glitter. A man at a piano, head bowed, fingers tracing invisible notes on the keys. Outside, the city hums. Inside, time stands still. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it. The faint rhythm of breath. The pause before inspiration strikes. He lifts his head, and the silence between notes becomes sacred. Every song begins this way, with a heartbeat, with longing, with a wish. And that's where Freddie lived most truthfully, in the space between creation and confession. His voice, even now, feels like both thunder and prayer. It carries everything: joy, defiance, heartbreak, love, and somehow it forgives the world as it sings. No one else could balance grandeur and fragility quite like him. He was the storm and the still water. He was the cry and the comfort. To hear him sing "Love of My Life" is to feel time fold in on itself. There's a tenderness in those words that seems to hold every lost love, every quiet goodbye. He wrote it for Mary, but he sang it for all of us, for every listener who has ever loved and lost and loved again. And when the crowd sings it back, thousands of voices trembling together, it becomes more than a song. It becomes communion. That's what his music does. It gathers people. Across borders, across years, across every difference the world tries to build between us. It reminds us that at the core of everything, beyond fame, beyond identity, beyond fear, we are all just hearts trying to find harmony. Maybe that's why his story feels so eternal, because it isn't just about one man's brilliance. It's about what happens when someone refuses to dim their light for anyone. He gave the world permission to be loud, to be strange, to be real. And in doing so, he gave us back a piece of ourselves. Sometimes when his songs play late at night, you can feel that gift returning. The notes hang in the air like lanterns, and for a moment, the world feels softer. You can almost believe that love never ends. It just changes key. In some unseen place, perhaps he's still there. Not the performer, not the legend, just Freddie. Smiling, humming, rearranging the stars into chords only he can hear. And when one burns a little brighter, that's his encore. The applause has faded. The curtain has long since fallen. But the light, his light, never goes out. He remains in the breath before the song begins, in the silence after the final note, in the hearts that still whisper, before sleep, his name. Freddie Mercury, the man who turned pain into power and left the world forever changed. And somewhere beyond the stars, he still takes the stage, bathed in light, free at last, reminding us that real love never ends. It just changes key. Morning always comes gently after a long night, and in that tender light, his story lingers like the final echo of a song. Freddie Mercury's life was not just about fame or fortune, but about the fearless pursuit of selfhood, that endless dance between who we are and who we dream of becoming. Even now, more than 3 decades after his final bow, his presence feels immediate. Walk through any city, and you'll hear him. From an open cafe door, don't stop. Me Now bursts like champagne into the morning air. From a passing car, we will rock you. Pounds like the pulse of the earth itself. From a quiet living room, These Are the Days of Our Lives floats soft and wistful like a sigh. The songs never age. They simply wait for the world to catch up to them again. Freddie's voice had something no one could quite name, a texture of truth, as if every lyric carried a piece of his soul. Even in the most theatrical songs, there was sincerity. Even in the softest ballads, there was thunder. He knew that life was not meant to be lived halfway. He believed in the extremes, the laughter that shakes your chest, the tears that wash you clean. And maybe that's what his life teaches us most, that beauty is not the absence of pain, but the courage to sing through it. He never denied his darkness. He simply turned it into light. In the archives of his interviews, there's a moment, small, almost overlooked, when he says quietly, "You can't be anything but who you are. That's the hardest thing in the world, but it's also the only thing worth doing." That is the philosophy that pulses beneath every note he ever sang. He didn't chase perfection. He chased truth. And when truth met melody, something immortal was born. There's a moment that fans often speak of, a recording from one of his last studio sessions. He was tired, his body fragile, his strength fading. But when the red light flicked on, he stood tall, adjusted his headphones and said, "Let's go for it." What came out was not weakness. It was power, vast, emotional, unyielding. A voice that had carried nations, still rising, still shining, still giving. That's the paradox of Freddie Mercury. His body failed, but his spirit grew louder. He sang not to defy death, but to honor life. And in that act, he gave the world something rare, a kind of eternal permission. To be unapologetic, to be flamboyant, to be tender, to love who we love without shame, and to live our truth without apology. Because what he really taught us, beneath the anthems, beneath the sequins, beneath the crown, is that every human being is capable of creating beauty, even from heartbreak, even from fear. When you strip away the legend, what remains is a man who simply believed in sound, believed in love, believed in the art of being alive, no matter how short the song might be. And so, in this quiet moment, wherever you are, whatever year it happens to be, he is still here, in the heartbeat beneath your favorite song, in the courage it takes to stand out, in the light that flickers behind closed eyes as sleep arrives. He is there, smiling, radiant, timeless, his hands resting gently on the piano keys, waiting for one more verse. The air still hums with his laughter. The stars above, perhaps, lean closer to listen. And, as the final note of his life story fades, it doesn't end. It simply dissolves into everything: the air, the music, the night. Freddie Mercury, the voice that burned brighter than the dark. The man who showed the world that pain can become power, and love can become forever. And perhaps, as the last chords fade into silence, you can hear him once more, gentle now, almost a whisper. Darling, the show must go on. The room grows still, and for a moment you can almost feel the world pause, as if even the stars are listening. That's how it feels when the story of Freddie Mercury reaches its quiet end. Not a silence of absence, but a silence full of presence, full of everything he left behind. His story doesn't belong only to the past. It lives in the pulse of every concert, every late-night radio song, every heart that dares to feel deeply. To remember Freddie is to remember something about ourselves, that life is meant to be vivid, unrestrained, and utterly, beautifully human. He was a contradiction made of grace. He was the softest soul wrapped in the loudest brilliance. He was laughter that hid sorrow, and sorrow that birthed joy. Every song he touched became a confession of what it means to live and to love and to lose, and to do it all with open arms. There's an image that lingers in the mind. Freddie, on stage, bathed in gold light, microphone raised high. Behind him, the band roars like the sea. Before him, 100,000 faces move as one. And there he stands, defiant, smiling, incandescent. For that single heartbeat of eternity, there is no sickness, no fear, no tomorrow. There is only now, that perfect trembling now. That's what he gave us. A reminder that life is not measured in years, but in moments. In the way a song can stop time. In the way love can rewrite loss. In the way a voice can still carry long after it's gone. Every time his music plays, he returns. In the way a candle relights another flame without losing its own. The world glows a little warmer for his having been here. Think of all he gave, the soundtracks to our triumphs and heartbreaks, the anthems we sing when words fail, the courage to live loudly in a world that too often whispers. His was not a perfect life, but it was an honest one. And perhaps that's what makes it so beautiful. He did not hide from the truth. He shaped it into art. He did not deny the darkness. He illuminated it with color. He did not beg the world to love him. He loved the world, fiercely, foolishly, fully, and left it glowing in his wake. Freddie Mercury was not just a man who sang. He was a man who listened to the heartbeat of the world, to the ache inside others, to the symphony within himself. And in answering that call, he gave us all something infinite. So when you close your eyes tonight, and the room is dark, and the hum of the day has softened to a sigh, remember him. Not as the legend, not as the ghost, but as a fellow traveler who dared to turn his pain into power. He is there in the quiet between thoughts, in the calm before dreams, in the soft rhythm of your breathing. He lives not in the noise of memory, but in the peace that follows it. And maybe, just maybe, as you drift into sleep, you'll hear him again. A voice beyond distance, warm and clear, singing softly into the dark. This is forever, my darling. The music never ends. In that hush between waking and dreaming, his story feels less like history and more like heartbeat. A rhythm that lingers, soft as candlelight, carrying both ache and awe. You can still see him if you close your eyes. The shimmer of his stage clothes, the arch of his smile, the way he held a note as if it could stop time. Freddie Mercury, forever caught between fire and tenderness. Sometimes when the night stretches long, people still speak of him in the present tense. Because the truth is, he never really became past. He remains woven into the fabric of music, of memory, of the small private moments when a song finds you and you can't help but hum along. The magic of Freddie was never just in the notes. It was in the spaces between them, the breath before a crescendo, the quiet sigh after the roar. He understood something most of us spend our lives chasing, that beauty and pain are not opposites, but mirrors. And so he lived, wildly, imperfectly, beautifully, turning every wound into art. When he sang Who Wants to Live Forever, it wasn't a lament. It was a question. He knew life's brilliance lay in its impermanence, that love, precisely because it fades, becomes sacred. He was brave enough to break his own heart for the sake of truth. And in doing so, he gave us all a kind of courage to face our own reflections, to forgive our own flaws, to love as he did, without caution. Think of it. A boy who once whispered songs to himself in the quiet corners of Zanzibar grew up to make the world sing. He took exile and loneliness and made them symphonies. He took fear and turned it into flame. That is what it means to turn pain into power, to transform the fragile into the unforgettable. And even now, in the hush before sleep, when the world is small and still, you can almost hear it. A faint melody, familiar and kind, rising from the dark. Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy? The question drifts through time, unanswered, eternal. And maybe that's how he wanted it, an invitation, not an ending. Because the story of Freddie Mercury is not a closed book. It's a song still unfolding in every heart brave enough to dream loudly. And perhaps, as the night deepens and dreams begin to shimmer, you might see him there, bathed in soft light, piano waiting, the crowd a sea of stars. He turns, eyes gleaming, voice warm with laughter. Shall we begin again? He asks. And of course, the answer is always yes. Because for as long as music exists, for as long as hearts beat, and love aches, and light flickers through shadow, the man who turned pain into power will never stop singing. And so, the melody circles back to the beginning, to Zanzibar, where the sea met the shore like the edge of a record spinning forever, where a boy named Farouk once listened to the rhythm of waves and dreamed of something he couldn't yet name. Everything that came after, the fame, the fire, the glory, was born from that quiet, from that simple desire to make beauty where there was none, from that longing to be heard. Even now, when the world speaks his name, there is an undercurrent of tenderness, because to remember Freddie Mercury is not to remember just a performer. It's to remember the universal story of creation, of how a single spark, tended with love, can ignite a world. He showed us that art is not separate from life, but an extension of it, a mirror for everything we fear, everything we crave. He proved that love can outlast the body, that music can outshine mortality. And perhaps that's why his absence still hums with life, because in truth he never stopped performing. He just moved to a larger stage. Some say you die twice, once when your heart stops, and once when your name is spoken for the last time. If that is true, then Freddie Mercury will never die. For as long as there are voices to sing, "We are the champions," as long as lovers sway to love of my life, as long as the defiant and the dreamers whisper, "Don't stop me now," under their breath, he remains. He belongs to the night now, to the quiet spaces between stars, to the hum of speakers, to the trembling air before the first note begins. He belongs to everyone who has ever felt different and dared to be radiant anyway. And in that belonging, he is eternal. Picture it now, a theater not made of walls but of sky. A piano waiting, polished by starlight. The crowd, countless and invisible, breathes in unison, and there he stands, smiling, ageless, utterly himself. The lights rise. The first chord strikes. It sounds like home. And when he sings, it's not loud. It's gentle, the way dawn is gentle, the way forgiveness is gentle. It fills the infinite. And for a heartbeat, everything stops. Somewhere, someone falls asleep to his voice. Somewhere, someone wakes inspired. And in both, he lives. The boy from Zanzibar, the man from London, the artist who became the echo of forever. He turned pain into power, loneliness into light, and life into song. And when the curtain finally fell, he didn't vanish. He became the silence after music, that perfect stillness that lets the heart remember what it's just heard. So rest easy now, dear listener. Let his melody carry you. Let his voice remind you that nothing beautiful is ever truly gone. And perhaps, somewhere beyond the stars, he still takes the stage, bathed in light, free at last, reminding us that real love never ends. It just changes key. The night deepens one final time, folding softly around the listener like velvet. What remains now is not story or fact, but feeling. A quiet glow that settles somewhere behind the ribs. Freddie Mercury's journey was never really about fame. It was about the brave act of being seen. He showed the world that artistry is not a shield against pain, but a way to shape it, to hold it, to make it sing. And in that transformation, he became a kind of light, one that continues to move through us quietly, endlessly. Imagine him now, beyond all endings. The lights dimmed, the roar of applause replaced by silence. He sits at a piano that stretches into eternity. The keys gleam like constellations beneath his hands. He breathes in, hums a single note. It vibrates through the night, and somewhere 1,000 hearts stir. The stars above him shimmer in time with the music. Each one a soul he's touched. Each one a life that once found courage in his sound. The melody he plays is neither loud nor sad. It's peaceful, a lullaby for the dreamers, a promise that the music never ends, it only changes form. Perhaps you can hear it, faint and far away, the rhythm of love turned to light. He glances up, smiles that knowing smile, and whispers into the dark, "Darling, you see, we were always meant to sing." And with that, he begins again. The chords rise like dawn, tender and golden. They carry everything, hope, memory, forgiveness, and wrap gently around the world. They reach you where you are now, resting, drifting, breathing. You can let them in. Let the sound of his voice become the quiet in your chest. Let the warmth of his music dissolve whatever heaviness remains from the day. Because this is the gift he left us, the knowing that we are never alone in our longing, never alone in our dreams, never alone in our love of the beautiful, fragile world. So rest now. The story has been told, but the song goes on. The boy from Zanzibar still sings somewhere beyond time, his laughter caught in the stars, his light alive in every note that dares to rise. And as you drift toward sleep, imagine him turning once more toward the cosmic stage, bathed in soft golden light. He raises his microphone, eyes bright as ever, and with infinite tenderness says, "This one's for you." The piano plays, the night sighs, and the man who turned pain into power sings softly, endlessly, into the eternal hush of love. Good night.